After 2 years of studying, I am finally done with this test. I scored a 760 on it. I'm in the top 1% of scores, and I can say I am officially done with it. Just like you, 2 years ago I was Googling how to get a high score on this test, and I saw people who got a 700, 730, 750, 780 in studying a week, in studying a month, in studying for 3 days. And what I found from these videos were they weren't replicable. They weren't helpful for somebody in my situation. So I want to make an in-depth guide on how to get a high score on this test. I'm going to give you a timeline from when I first learned about the GMAT all the way to when I scored a 760 on the test. I'm going to give you an honest review of all the resources that I used, some options if you have a tighter budget as well for navigating this test. I'll also give you tips on what is the most useful for scoring high on this test and some common mistakes to avoid. So before we jump into everything, it's important that I give you some context on my background. I was always good with math. I took calculus in high school, so I always had a very strong sense of numbers. English, even though I am a native speaker, was my weaker point. I wasn't very good with grammar, writing, anything in that world. I did not enjoy reading. I went to an average university. I had a very determined and competitive personality, and I found those skills to be very useful and helpful in getting me to score high on this test. In January of 2019, I decided I wanted to take the GMAT. This is the month where I learned the structure of the exam, so I learned the different categories: verbal, quant, integrated reasoning, AWA, understood that quant and verbal make up that 800 score, started getting familiar with the question types, sentence correction, data sufficiency, understand how much the math content goes out, all the way up to about Algebra 2. So kind of just familiarizing yourself with the test, the time constraints on it, how long you have for each question. End of January, beginning of February, this is when I was doing a bunch of research on different resources that I could use for studying. And as I mentioned, I was already strong with math, so I went straight for an advanced math book. So I purchased the Manhattan Prep Advanced Quant. On Amazon, I purchased because this was at 2019, I purchased the packet of official GMAT questions. This was about $50 on Amazon. I also purchased the Manhattan Prep Sentence Corrections and the GMAT Critical Reasoning Bible. So in February, I purchased all these materials, and from February to May, I was going through each one of these resources. I did about 1 to 2 hours of studying each day, and what I would do is I would go through it. I'd make a bunch of highlights. Well, this one doesn't have many highlights, but I'd make a bunch of highlights, add tabs, go through the practice problems, things like that. And then each day as well, I would go do about 20 practice problems in these books. I had an error log as well on Excel for keeping track of the official problems that I missed. It had things like the date, question, but I didn't really put too much emphasis on why I missed the question. It was very much like how many did I miss, not why did I miss them. And I kept that kind of schedule from February all the way till May. In June, I took my first practice test. The GMAT offers 2 free practice tests. I recommend saving these until you're finished with your big bulk of studying and you're ready to take the actual exam. I took the first test and I scored a 750. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is fantastic. I am ready to go. 2 weeks later, I took the second practice test. I scored a 700. I was like, okay. I dropped 50 points. On both of these exams, my quant score stayed at a 50 and my verbal dropped from like a 44 to a 36 or something. but I thought, you know what, it's still within the range of what I'm trying to achieve. As long as I get in the middle, as long as I average it out, I'm fine. Well, I kind of kept that mentality. From June to July, I was doing these problems and I was timing myself. So I was trying to get my conditioning up to kind of meet those time constraints as well. In July, I take the official test. First time I take it. Quant, breezed by it. I felt really strong in it, got a 50 on the actual test, so that was consistent with all my practice tests. Verbal, I plummeted. I dropped so low on verbal, I ended up with a 640 on the official test. During the verbal section, I had no time management. I was looking at the clock, getting worried, not being able to track how long I was spending on each problem. I didn't write anything in my packet. I used my fingers for process of elimination. I put them up to the screen and I would remove them for answers I thought were wrong. And I just ended up guessing everything. Anyway, that was really defeating, dropping 110 points from the first score that I ever got on the practice test. After that, I took a big break from GMAT. From August to December of 2019, I didn't study for the GMAT at all. I completely stopped. I realized, okay, my verbal, I obviously need a game plan. I need some strategy, and this self-study that I did was not working out. Going through and reading and rereading these books was not going to be the thing to get me to that score. I needed something formal. I needed an actual curriculum. I was trying to avoid spending a bunch of money because just the books and the tests in general are already expensive. But I decided this was an investment and not just a cost. So in January of 2020, I purchased the Veritas Prep course, the class. I took it with Travis Morgan. Before the class started, I went through the pre-recorded videos and I would watch those, take notes on those, learn those. That in itself was already incredibly helpful. The class added an extra layer of instruction to it, but just the pre-recorded videos were already a big step up from just reading these books for me. From February of 2020 to March of 2020, I'm doing the classes, and I'm also doing additional problems outside of class. They'll tell you, and it's true, that the class is not enough. You have to spend like double that amount of time outside of the classroom actually studying and doing more practice problems. So during that time, I was still going over the official guide problems. I was doing those problems, and at this point too, I started putting more emphasis on why I was missing things. So I started kind of analyzing within sentence corrections. I was missing kind of meaning-based questions. I was good with parallelism. So I was understanding which one, like the types I was missing. At the end of the class, I took 2 Veritas Prep exams and I scored a 680 and a 700. And I thought, okay, that's not too bad. It's kind of on the edge of where I'm trying to get to, but you know, it's not horrible. I retook one of the official GMAT practice tests that I took way back in June because I figured it was long enough now that I would forget about it. And I scored a 730, which is fantastic. But this was the one that I scored a 750 on originally, and it felt bad because I was like, I feel like I have so much more strategy that my score dropped. Anyways, I don't let that faze me, and I plan on taking the test in April of 2020. But I'm sure you can guess by now that the pandemic hits and GMAT is canceled for now, and then in April they release the online GMAT. I look into it, I do some research, I say, you know what, this is not for me. The online whiteboard didn't seem very helpful for Quant. I didn't like that there was no integrated reasoning in AWA in case if I apply for schools in a couple years, they might be looking for that again. So I decided not to do that. And from April to August of 2020, again, I completely stop. September 2020, I realized I can do in-person testing again. So I actually re-sign up for Travis Morgan's class on Veritas Prep, and you get a 1-year free access. So you can re-sign up for that class as many times as you want within that year. So I figured after taking that break, it'd be good to get a refresher on everything. This time, I'm kind of doing a little bit in the class, but I'm doing a lot more outside of the classroom. So again, I'm redoing these practice problems. I already know which ones I've missed and I know which ones I struggle with, so I'm redoing them. There's only so many practice problems that exist, so you end up redoing them by this point. I'm realizing that I make a lot more mistakes when I'm taking the test or when I'm doing like a practice test, because the time constraints don't let me fully finish a math problem. And the time constraints don't let me fully process a reading comprehension problem. So I realize I'm making a lot more little mistakes during this section. So I need to get used to these time constraints. I need to really practice that. So I started doing problems in much longer problem sets. I started doing, instead of 20 questions at once, I started doing 40 quant problems in one sitting with an 8-minute break, and then 40 verbal questions. That's more than the test. And I didn't shorten the amount of time per question. I just kept it proportional. So instead of 30 quant questions at 60 minutes, 62 minutes, or whatever it is on the actual test, I did 40 questions at 80 minutes. So I just expanded the amount of time, just get myself used to sitting there and doing these problems for a longer period of time and build up that conditioning. So from September to October, I'm retaking this class and I'm building up my conditioning. And I'm really starting to focus in on what I'm missing. I'm also taking Veritas Prep exams, and I get a 700, a 710, and a 680. So I'm like, okay, it's not horrible. It's still within that range. I'm feeling like I plateaued though, because a few months ago I scored about the same 680, 700. And then in October 2020, I retake the official test again and I get a 720. And I'm like, that's fantastic. Already boosted myself up significantly from 640 to a 720. And it's a little bit higher than my practice tests. But at the same time, I'm like, it's 10 points shy of the average for like top business schools. Just a little bit below. So I asked Travis, because he's also an admissions consultant, I asked him, is a 720 good enough for these schools? And he recommended that I retake and I shoot for a higher score. So because of that, I decided I had to buckle down and really figure out how to increase my score. And now I'm kind of keeping a much better eye on what I'm missing. I'm self-analyzing a lot more. I'm being much more honest with my shortcomings. And the biggest thing that I have been messing up this whole time is sentence correction. And the biggest thing within sentence correction that I'm messing up is meaning. And I think meaning is the most important piece from going from a mid 600 to a mid 700. Meaning is almost everything. I've found a lot of problems that had 2 answer choices. Both were grammatically correct, but one had the right meaning. I'll give you an example of questions that I was messing up. For example, only I went to the store. I only went to the store. I went to the store only. They're all correct, but they all have very different meanings. And those types of problems I just was having trouble with. Because of that, I was looking for a new resource, and I tried out Target Test Prep. I saw things about it on Reddit, because the employees are usually on Reddit. So I tried it out. It had $1 a month access, free access. So I went ahead and tried it, and I found that the sentence correction section was fantastic. It really gave me a strong understanding on how to differentiate the meaning, how to really understand sentence correction, and I felt significantly better. So from October to January of 2021, I was doing target test prep. I was rereading, I was actually redoing the Manhattan Advanced Quant section. And again, I was redoing these official GMAT questions. In addition to that, I found GMAT has an advanced problems book, but I found all those problems for free on GMAT Club, so I used it. I went to GMAT Club and I got the entire book pretty much. So my weekly schedule is looking like this. Monday, I do 40 verbal questions. Finish up that problem set, do a quick review on which ones I missed. Then the next day, I do a big review and I go through each question. I go, why did I get it right? Why did I get it wrong? Which ones are the trap answers? Why are they trap answers? And I did a heavy analysis on each one of those questions the next day. In addition to that, I also went through target test prep, and I would read about an hour or two, a couple chapters a night. Then the next, on Wednesday, I would do the same thing with Quant. I would do this one and the problem sets in the back of the advanced Quant for Manhattan Prep. And same thing with verbal. I would do all these questions, review which ones I missed, heavy learning the next day, which would be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday, I would take a break. For the weekend, Saturday, I would do a full practice test, and Sunday, I would review it. I would not review the same day I took a practice test because my brain was just fried. My brain was not ready to review. So I would do that from October to January, and I did that pretty consistently. And already from just kind of really focusing on meaning, my test scores shot up significantly. I did my Veritas Prep tests. There's about 7, so I'm not retaking these tests. I'm still going through them. And I retook the second official guide practice test, and I got a 740, 730, 740, 740. And this consistency felt fantastic. I was like, I feel like I'm ready. Like I'm ready to go. I had a test date originally planned in December, but it was canceled because there was a COVID outbreak at the test center. So they pushed me to January, and I ended up taking it in January. During the test in January, I did the verbal first, felt very good on it. Did the quant second, and the second question, I guessed on the second question. And as I was going through, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm messing this up. I am destroying my quant. I've been focusing so much on sentences and verbal that I forgot about my quant, and it's going downhill. But I made sure that I relaxed and I stayed composed, and I would just try my best. That's all I can do is I try my best. So I finished the entire test. After the quant section, I figure, you know what, let's just try my best on integrated reasoning and AWA, even though I feel like I bombed it. At the end of the test, I see a 760, and I'm like, oh my God, how did I do that? This felt incredible. So now I want to give you guys really an in-depth review on each one of the resources that I used. These guys are about $50 on Amazon. You can get them used. If you get them used, just make sure, because each one has problems in it, if you get them used, just make sure that there's no writing on the actual multiple choices. There's no crossing off and circling them. That's the most important part. If you don't want to spend it on the used or the new, pretty much every GMAT problem is on the GMAT Club forum, but you're going to have to do some work about compiling an entire book's worth of problems. So I was able to get the advanced GMAT problems. Instead of buying the book, I searched in the GMAT Club forum, the advanced problems. Someone had an Excel list, and then I copy and pasted that, and I would search each individual question. So then when I'm doing a problem set, I had a window up with like 40 tabs, and I would just go one tab next as I'm doing my practice test. So I could go each question individually. So these I highly recommend. This is the best, obviously the best place to get practice problems, just straight from the company itself. One thing I don't like, in the back of the book, they have answers and explanations. Some of the math explanations aren't very good. They choose the hardest way to answer this problem when there's actually a very easy way to answer it. So the explanations aren't the best. They are helpful, but they're not the best. Number two, that being said, if you're using the GMAT Club questions, you'll see responses to the answers in the bottom. Quant is usually reliable with those responses. Verbal, I don't recommend reading those responses except for the official explanation. I found it to be very unreliable with how they looked at sentence corrections and what was grammatically correct and what wasn't. So I much preferred the official explanation compared to those responses. The second one I used very often was the Advanced Quant for Manhattan Prep. Highly recommend this one. I like this one a lot. It has a lot of specific tips and tricks within it, guessing tactics, process of elimination tactics that I found very useful. I 100% used all these tactics on the test itself. The problems in the back were difficult, and it made me feel much more prepared for this exam using this book. The downfall of this book is the fact that it doesn't explain content very much. It already expects you to have a good foundation with understanding what an integer is, how to do probability and statistics. So you need to have a foundation before you jump up to this book. The next book I used is the Manhattan Prep Sentence Correction book. This was a good for foundations. It didn't go too much into the meaning. Like, I understood kind of basics of parallelism, modifiers. So I recommend this for kind of an average foundations. This does the job. I believe you might be able to find those as PDFs available online, maybe on some like kind of lower ranked sites on Google. And then this book, I bought this book, I read the entire thing, highlighted everything, did every exercise, and I gotta say, I did not like this book. It had so many good reviews, but I was not a fan of this book. I found it to be overly analytical and just overwhelming in general. They have so many different ways to categorize a critical reasoning problem that I didn't find it to be helpful to have all that in my brain on the actual exam. It was just too much information, honestly. So I was not a fan of this. Again, check it out. They might have a PDF version of it that you can see for free to see if it works for you, but this one did not work for me. So in addition to all those books, I also did the Veritas Prep class. The sentence correction class was very similar to the Manhattan Prep book, so you can interchange those ones and you get the similar outcome. Veritas Prep has pre-recorded classes, pre-recorded videos, the actual class, and tutoring. I never did tutoring. The pre-recorded classes are obviously cheaper, and those were very helpful. You can find those for free on the YouTube for Veritas Prep. That's where I found out about the company, and that's where I decided to actually purchase it, because I found those YouTube videos very helpful. They have a lot of them available online. Again, they have Veritas Prep books, which you might be able to find as PDFs somewhere on lower ranked Google searches. So those guys were all very helpful. Quant section of Veritas Prep wasn't very advanced. It was very helpful with building a foundation and basic strategy. I recommend that for building that foundation, but I recommend Manhattan Prep if you want to bump yourself up to a 750 plus range. The target test prep I use for sentence correction, and that one I highly advocate for. The reason I use that for the advanced section is because one of their very early on examples that they use is almost similar to a GMAT advanced problem book question I found in the actual GMAT book. Because TTP used almost a very similar, extremely difficult GMAT problem, I figured it's going to be very difficult for somebody who's still building that foundation to understand how to do this problem and understand why it's right and why it's wrong. So I recommend that more for the advanced side of things, not so much for building foundation. The critical reasoning section I did not enjoy. They recommended reading the prompt first, then the question. I like the strategy the Veritas Prep had, which was read the question, then the prompt, and I didn't find that useful. I didn't use that section. And then the quant section I really didn't like. I found it to be very introductory. Each section is a content area, and they explain things like distance equals rate times time, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, but they didn't have much strategy. There was one section at the very end that talked about strategy, but I wasn't a fan of how it was structured. So if you're trying to learn the very basic content, then TTP is probably helpful, but I needed more high-level strategies. Veritas Prep had more, and then Advanced Quant had the most. So I recommend kind of going in that order depending on where you're starting off at. TTP has a $1 a month free access, so you can utilize that if they still have that sale going on. That was going on for me. For reading comprehension, I didn't have a specific resource that I used. Veritas Prep does have a section on their website on different strategies and going through reading comprehension, such as note-taking. But for practicing reading more articles, I read the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, read a little bit of Scientific American near the end, but not enough to be meaningful. New York Times, Wall Street Journal has paywalls, so I'm sure you can find some other articles available online or non-paywall sites. As I was reading, don't just read the article to read the article. I mean, read the article to learn about the stuff, but don't read the article to breeze through it. After each paragraph, what I did was I read the paragraph and I said to myself, okay, tell myself again, what did the paragraph say? Why did the author write that paragraph? What was the purpose of writing that paragraph? Why did he include this line? What kind of tone does he have? And ask yourself those questions after every single paragraph. It's gonna take you forever to get through one article, but you will fully understand that article by the time you're finished. If you do that consistently, your comprehension is going to go up significantly. I also explored eGMAT. I checked out some of their free resources and I was not a fan of it. I found a lot of their things to be unreliable, more confusing than helpful, so I stayed away from eGMAT completely. So those are the resources that I use. There are options for getting kind of cheaper ones and getting ones that are more expensive. Those are the ones I found to be the most helpful. With these resources too, I recommend staying as up to date as possible on them. The 2019 GMAT was very similar to the 2021 ones, so it's not that big a deal if it's a couple years out, but make sure it kind of stays within, an up to date range. You want to make sure that all your resources have very similar questions to the GMAT. On the Veritas Prep practice tests, after you complete 7 of them, they have an additional 5 practice tests that you can do. I tried one of those and it did not seem reliable at all. I was like 30 of the quant questions were asking me about a range and really basic average, like what's the average of these 5 numbers, and I got a 51 on that, and it did not seem reliable at all. They actually had spelling mistakes in the questions themselves, so be critical about your resources as well. All right, let's get into the tips. So tip number 1, when you're learning about the GMAT in that first phase of understanding what the test is, determine what score is needed based on your background and your schools of interest. If you're trying to get into a Cornell versus a Harvard, there are obviously different GMAT scores, and even people getting admitted to Harvard, some people might need a 750 plus, some people might only need a 700. So determine what score you need based on your background and your schools of interest. Tip number 2, have a realistic time frame. A lot of the videos you'll see are people studying for a week to 3 months. The average amount of time is 3 months, but I took 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years completely. So have a realistic time frame. If you're trying to get yourself from a 650 to a 750 in a month, that's probably not going to happen. But if you set yourself up for a year plus, then you give yourself much more time to learn and grow. So have a realistic time frame based on where you're starting from. Tip number 3, be consistent. You want to make GMAT a part of your lifestyle. So after work, you might study for an hour or 2 each day, but just make it consistent. It doesn't have to be every day, it can be every other day. You can do 30 minutes during your lunch break, you can do it before work. Whatever you choose to do, just make sure you keep a consistent schedule. People who advocate for 10 plus hours of studying a day, it's not realistic, it's not sustainable, it doesn't take into consideration most people working full time, and it doesn't help with your learning. So whatever time you put towards studying for this test, make sure it's consistent, but make sure it's also realistic. The less time you have, the longer it will take you, but it doesn't mean you won't get there. And just remember that this test is a marathon, it is not a sprint. Tip number 4, don't focus on how many hours you've studied or how many problems you've completed. My mistake in the very beginning was I saw that it took 120 hours to score a high score on the GMAT. So I started counting my hours, and I made sure I would study for an hour a day. It is so much more effective for learning and for improving to do 10 problems and understand why you got the problems right, why you got the problems wrong. If you got them wrong, why did you get them wrong? And really understanding the problem in its full entirety. In sentence correction, for me, it was understanding all the decision points, and it's much better to do those 10 problems and fully understand them than doing 50 problems and just kind of checking what you have right and what you have wrong and not putting too much review into it. Tip number 5, be self-aware. You have to be very honest with yourself about where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. I already knew that my strength was quant and my weakness was verbal. And in addition to that, though, you have to really self-analyze. You have to understand within that category, what types of questions are you missing? Why are you missing them? What common mistakes and trends and patterns do you see within your own performance? An error log can help with this. Error log started helping me at the end because I started realizing that meaning was the biggest thing I was missing in sentence correction. You can also go to the GMAT Club forum and kind of ask other people, see what their input might be. If you can't afford it, you can go straight to a tutor. A tutor is obviously going to be the most helpful resource for you, but it's very expensive. Tip number 6, time management and conditioning is critical. Practice doing the full test on weekends. Save those first 2 free tests for once you feel that you're ready for it. But if you can't access more free tests, you can do exactly what I did. I didn't have 50 free tests to do. I went through the official guide and I just made a list of question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 50, or all the way to 31, and then I did the same thing on the verbal all the way to 36. So you can make your own practice tests using practice problems. It's not the end of the world, and I used my iPhone to time myself and give myself the same amount of time. So practice doing those long problem sets, build up your conditioning. The first time you take this test in its entirety, you will be exhausted. After you do this over and over consistently, by the time you do your 10th test, you're going to be able to go, okay, let me do another one. So build up that conditioning. Make sure you have time management. So time management, the very first time I took this test, I had no timetable. I had nothing to keep track of my time and how well I was making progress. So before the test begins, you can actually write on your whiteboard itself. You have some time to create a timetable. So this is the timetable that I created. This would be the quant section. This would be the verbal section. So this will tell you the question number that you're on, and this will tell you how much time you should have left. So in the quant section, you start off with 62 minutes, and that will be before you even start the test. By the time you finish question number 5, you should have about 52 minutes left. If you're within a minute or two, it's not the end of the world. That's fine. You can catch back up. But if you're a few minutes behind, you might need to guess on one problem or two problems to catch back up. So this is a nice timetable to kind of have on the top of your whiteboard to keep in track. The same thing with the verbal. This is going down from 65 minutes by 9 minutes for every 5 problems. I like doing 5 problems. I found that just kind of worked for me. Not every question on Quant you're going to answer in 2 minutes. Some, even if you are doing it perfectly, is going to take you more than 2 minutes. So don't track per question, track per group of questions. Tip number 7, guessing is needed, but educated guessing is better. So one thing that I felt very uncomfortable with in the quant section was guessing, because I knew there was a way to solve every single problem and I wanted to figure out how to solve it. But sometimes you just have to make a guess. Sometimes it's okay to just guess plainly and move on to the next question, but it's better to take 10 to 15 seconds to figure out, can you eliminate some answers right off the bat? If you look at a question, say in quant, and you see that the answer has to be positive, but there's negative answer choices, boom, you can eliminate those negative ones right away, and you're not out of a 1 out of 5 guess, now you're out of a 1 out of 3 guess, and they can guess and move on. So there are tricks to guess properly too. In the advanced quant on Manhattan Prep book, they go into that. Highly recommend reading that. For the verbal, I did less educated guessing, more, I was able to kind of narrow it down, but I did more just like flat out guessing. So I'm sure there are strategies for that one. I just don't have those strategies. Tip number 8, live a healthy life. You are learning and you are working out your brain every single day. You are trying to make your brain much stronger. You need to treat your brain like you would a muscle. You need to give it rest. You need to sleep 7 to 9 hours a day. You need to take proper breaks. You can't burn yourself out by overdoing these study sessions and overworking yourself. In addition to that, eat healthy. Give your body the nutrition and the vitamins you need to actually sit there for 3 hours and work your butt off. Find ways to manage your anxiety. Before the test, I would do some breathing exercises just to kind of slow my heart rate down, calm myself down, do kind of like positive affirmations, tell myself it's okay, just doing your best, it's no big deal. So find ways to kind of manage and reduce that anxiety that you feel. And if, say, you're feeling anxiety during a study session, it's okay to postpone it. It's okay to say, you know what, today is not my day. I'm going to take a break so I can care for myself. The GMAT, though it's going to become a part of your life, it is not your entire life, and you need to still take care of your body and your mind. So I hope this has given you some light at the end of the tunnel on how to achieve a 1% score on this test and get the score that you need to go to your dream business school. If you have any other questions, please leave a comment below. I'll put all the resources in the description as well. And if this video helped you out, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you guys, and good luck.